Hello, everybody. My name is Natalie Yeadon. I'm the CEO and co-founder with Impetus Digital. At Impetus Digital, we have built some of the best-in-class asynchronous and synchronous virtual collaboration and communication tools. We have worked with life science and pharma companies from across the globe over the past 13 years to help them with everything from virtual advisory boards, virtual investigator meetings, protocol groups, publication teams, and everything in between. And since the launch of our award-winning Insight Events platform, we've been helping pharma companies with hackathons, innovation sessions, MSL training, corporate events, and all sorts of other things. But more importantly, at Impetus, we really believe that everything starts with a conversation. And from these big, hairy, audacious conversations, we can all work with some of the leading edge thinkers, the digital provocateurs, these leading edge healthcare leaders, for us to all work to collectively and positively disrupt healthcare. So I'm thrilled to have a couple of these leading edge thinkers with me today. First of all, I'd like to introduce you to Michael Wilson. Michael has over a decade of experience in bioinformatics and metabolomics. I know I probably screwed that up. Metabolomics, research with a background in biological and computer sciences. He has also co-authored 19 scientific publications and one textbook, as well as participated in 2 international data exchange committees for bioinformatics data formats. As the CEO at DrugBank, Michael leads the strategic direction, operations, management, and business development teams to drive the company's growth. Today, DrugBank has millions of users and customers located in more than 20 countries, and they're rapidly transforming their data-driven medicine to make things better in the future. I'd also like to introduce Craig Knox. He's the co-founder and CTO of DrugBank. He has more than 15 years of experience in computing science, genetics, and metabolomics and bioinformatics, and research to guide, and he does research to guide DrugBank's rapid growth. For a decade, Craig has served as a bioinformatician and team lead at the University of Alberta's Genome Canada Help Desk. He then went on to work as a software engineer in Santa Monica before co-founding a global bioinformatics consulting company. Today, as the co-founder and CTO of DrugBank, Craig leads an impressive team of software developers and curators focusing on technology strategy and alignment, AI applications, and data integration and quality. Welcome, Michael and Craig. So happy to have you on the show today.
Awesome.
Welcome.
Great to be here.
Yeah.
Well, I have to say, quite an impressive resume for the two of you. You've done a lot of things. You've gone in a lot of places. I think that a lot of people listening to the show would be interested in hearing a little bit of your career journey, all the places you've been, and sort of what made you land at DrugBank today. So maybe we can start with you, Michael.
Sure. Yeah. So I studied at the University of Alberta here in Edmonton in Canada. And I guess when I started university, I didn't even know the word bioinformatics. As of course, many people when they start university, they don't know all the career options that are out there. But yeah, I started in the field of biology and I always had a passion there. And then I discovered a passion for computing science along the way as well. And of course, bioinformatics is kind of that marriage of computing science and biology. And it's a really interesting, exciting field. It's something that's really rapidly changing and rapidly expanding today. And you know, it's just a really exciting field to be in. So in university, I did some work in different areas. In synthetic biology was one interesting area as well. And I also, I guess, got a kind of a bug for entrepreneurship through some of the programs I did at university. So there's kind of this just exciting concept, and one of the reasons that you know, I even wanted to kind of venture out of academia and try and start a company is just the idea of taking a lot of these amazing things that you know, science is advanced, the amazing advances in science, the amazing developments, and things that that I was seeing in the research that we were doing at the university, and trying to apply that, taking that and applying it into the, into the real world, and seeing that there's something very exciting when you see customers using the things you're developing, when you're seeing the impacts that you're having, and you can really multiply that impact with a company. So that was one of the reasons that, I guess all of these kind of different areas of passion came together. And that was, I met Craig there. So he'll talk a bit more about his background, but we met in Dr. Wishart's lab doing research, and actually doing research on DrugBank and things there. So we'll talk more about the history of DrugBank, of course, but it did come out of the University of Alberta. And yeah, that's kind of where we met and where it all started. And we had lots of different ideas. There's about different technologies to spin off. We tried some various things before we landed on DrugBank as well. So
wonderful.
Yeah.
Wow, that is so impressive. And I love that if sometimes these things just kind of come up to us sort of serendipitously. We're not oftentimes planning to do it, so we're not striving. So it's always really interesting how life just, spins out what it does. So I'd love to know the same thing for you, Craig. Tell us a little bit about what brought you here today.
Sure, yeah. I definitely remember reading like a Wired magazine article back in the late 90s about the Human Genome Project. And I thought that was such a cool thing. I was kind of marrying this, what I was really interested back then in computers and programming with actually solving real world problems and innovating and creating things that we'd be able to build the future off of it when it comes to things like medicine. But I was in bioinformatics as well at the University of Alberta. And I think I was the third person to graduate from that program or something like that. So it was still very kind of the new kid on the block back at that point. I ended up working with Dr. David Wishart as well in the lab, where we're kind of jumping right away into things like DrugBank and other databases and tools that were kind of taking a lot of the information that previously had been locked away in different textbooks and stuff like that, bringing them into a digital format, making them available for research use and for going in the direction we wanted to go with digitizing that entire area. I had founded a consulting company in bioinformatics in that time, again, kind of going back to that entrepreneurial bug that was there with a different co-founder. We had some moderate success. We built some systems for patient records for specifically with infant cardiac heart transplant patients, as well as some databases for cataloging what's in food and that kind of stuff, which was really exciting and fun to work on. But then I took a total turn. I thought I want to get some experience in sort of the real startup world. And I ended up getting an offer from a friend down in Santa Monica to go work at a company called Xfire. And they were sort of the original Twitch streaming service. They were the first ones to figure out how to do that. And it was quite an experience. We had I don't know if you've seen the TV show Silicon Valley, but we had shady Russian investors and IP stolen. Our CEO was banned from the country at one point, had to work remotely. It was a lot of craziness, but also learned a ton about what to do, but also a lot about what not to do in a startup. And we got to build some really cool technology and had a lot of fun along the way. When I returned, Michael and I kind of got together, and we both have very sort of similar ideas about what we imagine as in the future. And we saw some really cool opportunities with some of the things that were being done at the lab at the time. And like Mike said, tried a few different things and learned a lot along the way. It was sort of our, you kind of get like a quick undergrad or master's in business just by trying to start a company, and we were going through that process. And that kind of takes us to when we started DrugBank, which is the next step, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. So what a story, Craig. That's awesome. Love it. And the fact that you both sort of paired up and decided to take off on this entrepreneurial venture together. So Michael, you're obviously dabbled in a variety of different, and usually companies do, you'll start in various areas and then you'll pivot, and then you'll find that sweet spot, or basically where the market fit is. So maybe you can help to define us what the problem statement is. What was finally that sweet spot, that market fit? What was the market dynamic or the gap or the need that you were hoping to fulfill and solve?
Yeah, for sure. So the really key problem that's fundamental to DrugBank is that advances in therapeutics and interventions, clinical practice, all require reviewing and synthesizing biomedical research to inform the hypothesis and the decision making that's fueling those advances. And this is a problem that really affects the entire industry in healthcare, from bench side to the scientists in the labs to bedside, doctors in the clinics. Everyone depends on having scientific evidence, biomedical research to inform those decisions at every level. But the challenge here is that it's increasingly difficult to find the correct information because biomedical data is growing exponentially. It's disconnected. It's mostly locked up in unstructured texts. On top of that, you have conflicting evidence. And because it's science, the evidence is constantly changing, constantly being updated. So it's a real challenge, and it's getting harder and harder for people to keep up with all of that information, just to find the correct information. And so that's kind of that fundamental problem that we're solving. And really, basically, the way we solve it is, in a very, very short way to sum it up, is a platform that continuously aggregates and structures the world's biomedical information. We use AI to decode text. We use expert reviewers to ensure high accuracy. And we make it really easy to find the correct information to answer all of these complex questions. So it's a that's kind of that core problem. And there's a lot of different use cases that you can build on top of our solution.
Beautiful. So in other words, Michael, you're kind of a curators of gargantuous amounts of data that any given human being wouldn't be able to put together and create some sort of seamless structure to it. And again, just because the immensity of the database, but also how rapidly the data is forthcoming. And so you're being able to create a structure or scaffold around that. So you basically put all that stuff in and it kind of squirts out this really nice structured way of sort of interpreting it. Yeah. So Craig, with all of that in mind, databases are the new gold. Data is the new gold. And so you're really putting a business in place, Craig, of this. So I'm curious, is there other databases that are out there right now that you're competing against? And if so, what is unique and special about what a DrugBank does, and that really makes it stand out and people want to use yours instead?
Definitely, yeah. There's a variety of different competitors in this space. They cover, some commercial solutions focusing on some of the clinical side of things. There's a lot of open databases of NIH. In Europe, they have the EBI, European Bioinformatics Institute. But what makes DrugBank so unique, and has made it so unique from the beginning, is this breadth of capturing everything from the structure level details and molecular level details about, what is the chemical structure of the drug? What are the proteins it interacts with? How is it metabolized? All the way to the clinical side of things. So this is covering, what does the pill look like that you take? What are the products associated with it? When were they approved? What are their drug indications, adverse effects, drug interactions? So DrugBank is the only resource that captures this entire breadth of knowledge and allows you to make those leaps between those different concepts. So wherever you are along the research or clinical path, from drug discovery to sort of bedside treatment, there are use cases that where you can dive into the database and be able to connect to this wider context that allows you to give better insights and information about treatment options or choices made at the bench side level, where someone in a pharma company is deciding what drugs to pursue. It can slot in at any of those points. A lot of the existing solutions are typically deep, but filling a very more narrow gap in that area. And DrugBank is very unique in its ability to.
So you were alluding, Michael, earlier to the AI, the machine learning that's built into the system. So again, this is sort of the 21st century of the typical analog database. We all know these databases that information's put in them and they can get obsolete really quickly. So would you say that a unique dimension to your database is it's almost like this continual refreshment, if you will? So if somebody was to look up drug A, that you would know and feel the satisfaction that that information is always going to be most current. What can you speak around that core difference?
Yep. Yeah, that's a really, really important part. So an easy way to kind of think about what we do is we basically pull all this evidence together. We build up a layer of evidence, and that's the layer that's always changing, right? And then we have our layer of kind of facts that are based on that evidence. So we take that information, we put it together and we interpret it, and then we build up a layer of facts. So when there's new evidence that comes in, that might conflict with something, some of the existing evidence, right? It could be a change, it could be new information. And so we have a lot of efficient ways to update information as we identify those pieces of evidence that are kind of new and important. And then we have also a really important aspect, which is we call it a hybrid approach. So we have our expert team, we have our AI tools. So we push information to our experts as well. And what our expert team of curators is doing is they're making sure that we're capturing the right level of detail. We capture a lot more detailed structured information than other sources. We're also capturing the right structure. So how you represent that knowledge is what opens up these use cases, right? The questions you can ask depend on how it's structured. So we always put a lot of work into making sure we're structuring it in the right way as well. And all of those facts are then linked back to that evidence. So there's a lot of different important parts. Part of it is that it's being updated all the time. Part of it is how it's structured, the questions you can ask, and part of it is that completeness and having that expert insight to make sure that it is complete and make sure that it is representing the world factually. So there's a lot of pieces that come together, and then I guess the AI tools are kind of the glue that brings all of that together and makes it work smoothly, quickly, efficiently, and helps us to keep it's really our special sauce, I guess, that the way that we integrate all those pieces together so that it's continuously improving, it's continuously updating, it's continuously going faster. And yeah, that's kind of the key thing for DrugBank.
So Craig, with all of that said, and I really want to double click on this for a minute, because the structure of how people can do their queries. So basically the search engine is really the powerhouse behind this. Can you tell us what the typical types of questions and data sets that come up in this? I'm thinking specifically right away off the top of my head, things like chemical structures, the pharmacology, pharmacogenomics, drug protein relationships. What are some of the standardized questions and queries that your system is able to bring up for people very quickly?
Right. So we do cover that broad depth from pharma to clinical. So I'll focus in on the pharma area. One of the areas that DrugBank is heavily used in and has become sort of industry standard in really is in drug repositioning and drug repurposing. So with this, you're looking at existing approved drugs, what diseases they're associated with, and trying to identify new disease associations for those drugs. So a drug that is already approved has a well-known established toxicity profile. It's cheaper to bring to market. DrugBank, with all of the information that we know that is captured in the database about its drug indications, what countries it's approved in, when, for what specific conditions and what they're associated with, to the drug interactions that it might be involved in, the drug targets. All of this information is really useful in the form of, if you imagine a graph, because once you have that graph, you can start to do some really cool things in the artificial intelligence space to find new connections that aren't obvious. If someone is looking at it, a human's looking at it, they're not seeing that there's these additional connections that are there. And there's a lot of work that's being done in that space to try to identify new diseases. COVID-19 is a good example where DrugBank was used heavily to look at existing antivirals, these types of drugs, and try to identify if there was a good fit based on its chemical structure and properties. And so that's just one example, but you can quickly just pull out all that information. It's well structured. It's in a format that's almost plug and play. You can take that and put it into maybe the machine learning algorithm or model that you're building at your company, and it saves, years and years of putting this data together yourself.
Absolutely, it's very, very interesting. And so, we hear a lot about drug discovery, kind of early identification, sort of in silico, coming from computer algorithms. We hear a lot about quantum computing, being able to do these kinds of amalgamations and identifications very quickly. So I was wondering how you describe this, Michael. It's almost like the ubiquitous building blocks, which are these chemical entities. Is the algorithms able to put Lego piece 1 with Lego piece 2 into new conformations that nobody's ever thought about? And then the AI enables you to determine this new way that this new chemical entity that you created with Lego block 1 and Lego block 2 that we've never thought about before. Is this kind of the way this kind of the way DrugBank is working?
Yeah, so basically that what you're describing would be kind of an approach, one way you might try to predict new drugs, right? So we actually enable our customers to try many different approaches. So there's all these different stages of drug discovery that Craig was kind of touching on there. But when you're looking at a new approach and you're looking at an example like what you're saying, where you want to take this maybe a modular approach where you have something like almost Lego blocks for chemicals, you want to make a new configuration, and then the next step you want to do is predict, is that going to work? Or is that going to cause side effects? How is it going to be metabolized? So all of these different AI approaches, they are basically different ways to predict something about that drug. So some of our customers, they'll be trying to predict many different things at once. Other cases, they're focused on a more narrow question. Maybe they're just focused on trying to predict side effects, for example. But in any of those cases, you need the knowledge in order to train your machine learning models, right? So with all machine learning approaches, you can't really just program it in or tell it what to do. You have to show it. You have to give it examples and data and knowledge so that it learns from that data what to do and what predictions to make. So one of the really important things that we do is provide that knowledge for those AI algorithms to learn from. And because there's so many different possible ways to approach that problem, and people come up with new ways every single day, we actually enable that pace of innovation to increase, because now you have a new idea, you want to try a new experiment, a new in silico experiment. Instead of the first step being collect all this data and figure out how I can do this, and then, okay, now finally after doing all that work, I can try that experiment. With DrugBank, you can just do the experiment today, try an experiment, iterate, tweak again, tries this, bringing this other data in, bring our data about metabolism, bring our data about side effects, whatever it is. There's hundreds and hundreds of different types of data that we capture that you have at your fingertips to do those experiments with. So it's, we don't make predictions about what drugs are going to work, but we enable all of our customers to take different approaches, experiment with different approaches to make those predictions. Yeah.
And when those customers do that, does that feed into the brain, if you will, of your machine algorithms? Is that the data through those consistent experimentation that feeds and the machine that helps the machine to learn?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. So when more so there's different kind of feedback loops like that. So with certain customers, they might have their their data is very proprietary. They don't send any information back. In other cases, they might send information back. So then there's opportunities to keep learning and expanding on that. And then within DrugBank, we always have these loops where we're constantly improving, constantly learning from data as new data is coming in. So it's definitely a case where sometimes we talk about it as a data network effect, where bringing new data in, actually, the sum of the parts in the data is greater than the whole, right? So all the connections between them, you bring something new in, it actually creates more value more quickly because now it's in context of all that other knowledge that we have. So
yeah, which is the brilliant part.
Yeah, it's a really really neat thing to see. Yeah, it's a really exciting, how much progress we've made because of those kinds of feedback loops that we create.
We've talked a little bit about scientific publications and all the unstructured data that's located in hundreds and thousands of journals and data everywhere that's being collated historically. We're also talking about people's experimentation of pulling things together and kind of feeding into the system. I'm also curious about APIs and partnerships with other companies. Specifically, I'm thinking about data like genomics and data with that, and then being able to parse that or curate that on top of it. So it's not just about drug interactions anymore. It's based on this particular genetic mutation. We're going to predict XYZ response or efficacy. Craig, can you talk a little bit about, is that part of the eventual plan, or is that something that you're already currently doing at DrugBank?
Yeah, we definitely we support and customers doing that in our space. We again are we're collecting a lot of that knowledge and bringing it together into a format that allows our customers to take that and run with it. So one of the things about a lot of those data sets is there's all sorts of ones you can use. There are a variety of quality, but we do a lot of work to pull it in and confirm and go through the process of checking that data and making sure it's high quality. Yeah, it's I don't know, there's particular customers, Mike, you might want to talk about that are doing that more.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, there's some really interesting examples of that we can enable. So one customer is called SciAps, and they basically look at oncology drugs, and they will measure the specific mutations in a specific individual, and then they bring in DrugBank data to help them understand how those mutations are going to affect possible treatment regimen. So there's a lot of ways that we enable that kind of thing today. And then in the future, as we get more integrations and pulling more data back into DrugBank, we can keep enabling that learning to happen faster and faster at a faster pace. So yeah, it's kind of a combination of our future vision, things that we plan to do more of in the future, as well as things that we enable today. But we definitely enable a lot of advances in the precision medicine space overall. But yeah, there's just, whenever I think about precision medicine, I just think about how there's so much more potential for that field, right? It's really at its infancy.
It certainly is. So on that idea of integration, certainly there's potential use case for physicians, the use for it for telehealth. Is there any thoughts around eventual integration with electronic health records, Craig? And what are we thinking about there with DrugBank?
Yeah, DrugBank is used currently in several smaller electronic health record companies. So companies doing things like home care in that area. We are powering a lot of the features that they need, searching for drug interactions, getting reports on a particular patient, what their needs might be, and flagging different things like potential adverse effects or contraindications, depending on their disease state. So we are, we're definitely being used in that space currently in the telehealth space. There's always lots of room to grow. Telehealth is obviously a hugely a growing market right now. And with electronic health records, that's definitely something that we want to move more and more towards offering plugins or whatever it is to support the sort of larger networks. But it's on the roadmap for sure.
So I guess would the idea be that if you were a plug-in, for example, to an electronic health record, physician prescribes a certain drug for a patient, and then your plug-in will red flag, or, there's going to be this drug interaction. Is that kind of what the thought is, Michael?
Yeah, and that's kind of something that we do today with our API as a integration. So we provide a lot of clinical decision support tools. And the future direction is just providing more and more of, essentially using the context in those medical records, providing smarter insights, using more of that knowledge that we have, the evidence that we have, surfacing information that ultimately just helps physicians make better decisions, or find the correct information to make the best decision for that patient. And the way that we see it ultimately is, if we keep going in that direction, we keep pushing our technology forward, we ultimately can help people across the industry to just make sure that they're always using the best possible information to make that best possible decision for that patient, and ensure that they are getting the best outcome. Right today it's basically, it sounds like something that's easy to achieve, but it's actually just impossible today. It's, people don't have the tools that let them do that, and it's getting harder because of things like genetic information. The information complexity is increasing. And then if you imagine going into the future where we want to have more tailored treatments for individuals, we want to look at, there's probably going to be new ways to have multiple treatments that are very specific to that individual, to their specific conditions that they have. So the decisions you're making are even more complicated in that scenario. So to enable that future, we really need to provide people with tools that let them make use of a lot more information than you can keep in your head, really, is what it comes down to. We have to augment people's abilities and intelligence. And so that's ultimately what we're doing, is building tools that let people leverage this huge amount of information that we have in a much more powerful way, and ultimately enable that next version of medicine that we all dream about and people talk about, that really isn't being realized yet today.
So really interesting, and I'm going to ask a provocative question here, Craig, is that as we start to think about this new world of major data, and as you said it so eloquently, Michael, it's more data than any human being can, as a physician who trained and is probably trying to keep up on the data, could ever have in their head. So we're now looking at this almost like this augmentation of a human brain with the computer and all of the data that's being held in DrugBank as an example. I'm sort of looking at the potential use case for even things like pharmacists and nurses, and potentially even well-educated caregivers. Could we see the day, just provocatively, where we don't necessarily have to pay very high paid physicians, where we almost democratize the healthcare decision-making, data entry component to any of these generalized people that are much more widespread? Because as we look at cost containment, and we sort of minimize that, very high end, because quite frankly, the machines are going to really be able to make those decisions. We need people who are going to feed into it and be empathetic and, and be able to communicate that to a user. But do we ever see that maybe happening with systems like DrugBank?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good question. Definitely provocative. It's hard to know what the future will hold for that in terms of where technology is going. But right now, in the near term future, I almost look at it more like, there's this sort of cognitive overhead that is required for a physician, a nurse, any practitioner to stay on top of this information and to get the most recent information and know that, the decision they're making is not out of date by 2 years or whatever. I mean, this does happen, really. There are cases of this that are happening today, where certain drugs that shouldn't be prescribed anymore are still being prescribed because the person just didn't get to read that report. these technologies we're building, as well as and we're enabling people with, is really to remove that cognitive overhead and allow the physician who's really good at making those intuitive decisions to focus more of their brain power on that piece, and give them all the tools to with the background, everything that you need to. We're not trying to replace, there's sort of augmenting human intelligence, but there's also augmenting human intuition, which is something that doctors rely on heavily. And if we can give them more of that confidence that their intuition is correct, because it's not just because their peers are doing this, it's because the research in DrugBank says this is the state of the art, this is the thing, you can rely on this and trust this, then I think that will be the first major step towards, and will ultimately have a huge impact across the whole healthcare space. Just to start, it's sort of like, if you imagine that, that future, it's the low-hanging fruit almost towards going to that direction. I don't really know what happens when it comes to, past that, replacing those hard decisions that doctors make. Maybe one day. It's hard to know. There's often, I think we're, if you think of self-driving cars, I think we were supposed to be all driving self-driving cars by now. So, AI.
Well, we're on to flying taxis now, Craig. So.
AI is a powerful tool, but it's also not a magic bullet. It's sort of there's a lot further to go with the human element as well.
Yeah, no, it's all very interesting. I'm also curious. I mean, lots of use cases. We've talked about pharma companies, drug discovery. We've talked about hospitals, EMRs, physicians and telehealth, potentially even pharmacists, right? Let's be really frank. They're ones who need to know about drug-drug interactions. What is currently the business model? Somebody has to pay for your system. So who is paying for this?
Yeah. So the key thing for us right now, we focus on early stage drug discovery companies. So they have subscriptions to in all cases, it's APIs and data APIs that our customers access and integrate into their software and workflow. And we focus right now on two main segments. So that's the early stage drug discovery companies. So companies that are doing active development, actively trying to find new drugs. And they have some kind of, especially ones that are looking at an AI approach or some kind of data science, bioinformatics approach. That's really our sweet spot. And then that same platform, we also have a plugin for clinical software, for precision medicine software and EMR applications that can then bring in DrugBank's knowledge into their applications for clinical decision support. And so in both cases, they are subscriptions. So you have an ongoing subscription that gives you access to the constantly updated information. It gives you different ways to query and ask questions to the data, to the platform to get those answers back. And then what questions you're asking depend on which area you're in, right? So as we keep pushing our product forward, we keep adding more ways to ask questions, and that kind of opens the door for new types of users within those industries. And that's essentially the business model in a nutshell. We also have a free online website where we actually support a lot of academic research happening in the world, and that website has more than 26,000. We've achieved more than 26,000 citations in scientific research of researchers using DrugBank in their research. And over the last year, there was more than 2,000, I think, publications specific to COVID-19 research. So wow. We also have a huge amount of researchers making use of the DrugBank information in that way. And then that online portal also has a lot of summaries of information where you can kind of just look up one-off, do a deep dive on a certain drug that you're interested in. So that's a really important showcase for our information, and that's also one way that we've really become an industry standard in a lot of ways for pharmaceutical research. And we've developed, we managed to have quite a large impact on the world, and we've helped to push forward the field of drug discovery, push forward many of the areas of clinical decision making as well through that research that we've supported.
Beautiful. Yeah. So, I mean, there obviously you've got two streams, like you said, it's pharmaceutical drug discovery, and then being able to determine, best next logical, prescribing or whatever at the patient level. So, in terms of clinical decision making. So, what are the metrics? So, how do you sell this idea for people to actually want to pay for this subscription? So, on the drug discovery, what is the benefit? Is there like a cost savings? Do you have things to show about how much faster drugs are done? And on the clinical decision making, do you actually show reduction in hospitalizations, or what are those measurements of success? Craig?
I can talk about the pharma side of things. I think it costs about $12 billion to bring a small molecule drug, a new approval to market. About 14 years using, and that's growing exponentially. I think one of the reasons why it's growing that fast is because we have unlocked a lot more computing power, a lot more access to data. There's just more data. There's 28 million publications that come out every year. It's just hard to be able to track that, integrate it, bring it internally into these pharma companies. DrugBank, by basically handling and taking over a lot of that data integration pieces, pulling in information from a variety of resources, applying and building very specialized machine learning algorithms that would be required for a pharma company to stay on top of this internally. We're taking that weight on ourselves, and they're just getting this nice output where it's just a stream of information comes in, they can process it, use it in their systems. And one of the key things about artificial intelligence in pharma is it's still relatively new, but it's already starting to make some big impact with several drugs that are in clinical trial right now that have been coming out developed through these algorithms. There's also the secondary factor of that is that it's everyone wants to make safer drugs that we know already before it goes into clinical trial that it's not going to be toxic. It's going to be past the blood-brain barrier. All these sorts of things that you can do early on, and to do those things at those points in time, it's not even necessarily like strictly dollars. It's like you can't do it without DrugBank, and so we're unlocking a whole new area that allows people to do those things, and ultimately in the future have large cost savings to develop a new drug and ideally pass that on to the consumer and the healthcare system.
So really what you're saying, Craig, is a short-term investment for pharma for a long-term gain with a savings. So Michael, on that same note around the clinical decision-making, what metrics do you use? And for example, how does this maybe seem really attractive for payers or insurance companies?
Yeah. That's a good question for insurance companies. So, for payers and insurance companies, it's not something that we don't currently target the payer. Currently, we really enable the clinical software companies to just improve the value they're bringing to their customers. So, the thing is about some of the things like drug interactions are just at this point an expectation. So it's not even about metrics at that point. It's just either you have it or you don't, and you have to have it. So in a lot of those cases, we're really enabling the basic necessities there that you have to have for your clinical decision support. I don't really have any good metrics on specifically how many, the specific numbers you're hoping to hear there, but that's kind of a key thing. And then the other key thing that's unique for DrugBank, or more unique for DrugBank, is how we enable those precision medicine companies to actually start using their genetic data or sequencing data to also support those decisions, support that clinical decision making, and kind of integrate it in with the sort of more standard things like drug interactions. You have to have drug interactions. So but you can now
Yeah,
integrate
I mean,
that more.
eventually, when you have more data and you're able to have the financials to show it reduced X number of hospitalizations and all that, then you'll become very, very attractive to insurance companies.
Yeah.
And so, I guess really the question comes down here around interoperability. We have disparate systems all over the place, being able to patch this on, or APIs or plugins. What does that look like? And do we see some sort of a semblance of, I know right now we talk about unstructured data. Publications are all written in different formats, and your machines are having to pull and extract based on, programs that you ask it to do. Do we see a day in the future where everything is in a template and there's this standardization, or is that just never going to happen? So interoperability and standardization.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. The problem, I guess one problem with standards is they tend to propagate. So usually someone will create a new standard to try to solve that problem like you're talking about, and say, okay, now this will be the new standard that everything can connect to this standard. But then in the end, you just have one more standard. So will everything ever be?
And then somebody will always deviate from it. So
yeah. So we actually kind of take an approach for interoperability where we will have our own internal version, and then we map out to those other external versions. So we'll map out to the equivalent concepts in different, that could be, for example, a disease ontology, like MEDRA or ICD-10, will map our concepts to those equivalent concepts in those other standards. And so that way we can sort of, speak those different languages and translate between those different languages. That's the approach we take, and that helps us to integrate our data with these different sources. It helps our customers to more easily bring DrugBank knowledge into their whatever system they're using. So yeah, there's a lot of ways to solve that problem, but I really doubt that it will ever be the case where everyone has all the exact same, there's lots of standards, and in certain regions, right? A certain region, they might say this is the EMR standard we're all using, but it just tends to be the case that at some point,
as human beings, we always like to do things differently. So I guess that's just part of our human nature.
Yeah.
So Craig, we would be remiss if we didn't dabble a little bit on the concept of blockchain. I mean, at the end of the day, you guys are data experts. And so the question always inevitably comes down to is, how do we put stuff out there so that there's a little bit more of democratization, safety of data, security, but also people being able to monetize it. So if Center A, is dabbling and doing experimentation, putting the information on blockchain, can other people who are using and starting to build on it, can the originator get monetized for it? So I'm just curious about the future of DrugBank, and do you ever see yourselves using blockchain?
I guess this is a chance for us to launch our new DrugBank coin that we're
the NFTs of DrugBank.
No, yeah, it's an interesting thing. I mean, for me, because I've worked in databases for a long time and database technologies, I know there are definitely advantages in blockchain technology in certain aspects of healthcare, but I think often maybe like AI, it's a bit oversold as a solution to everything, and where there's a lot of complexity involved, when really it would make much more sense just to store something in a regular database, but then give people the ability to link into that. Right now we don't have any sort of blockchain plans in the future. I'm sure some of our customers are working on that and using DrugBank and integrating some of the data in it, but it's not something that's near close on our roadmap or anything like that.
Right. I'm gonna just do a rapid fire between you, Michael, and you, Craig. So the quick question for you is, what do you see as the future predictions for and vision for DrugBank in the pharmaceutical industry, or just health tech in general? So starting with you, Michael, what are some of your thoughts about what are you looking forward to, or what are you excited about in the future?
Yeah, I think enabling more advances in precision or personalized medicine, and new types of drugs that are not possible today. I mean, it's still it's still very population focused, but in the future, we'll be able to use a lot more of what we know about an individual and really tailor the treatments to them, and even potentially have new ways to approve drugs in the future that are, well, I think that's a really important part, because right now it's still very population focused. So we might maybe have a family of drugs that gets approved and sort of rules around how that family of drugs could be applied to different individuals. So
I love that actually, by the way, because I think there's a lot of learnings just on what you said there about COVID-19, basically being able to manipulate really the regulatory and legislation systems that we have, the legacy systems. So it really is interesting about what you're saying is really kind of disrupting all of that legacy framework and scaffolding and kind of looking at things really differently. So, and around bioinformatics. So I think that's brilliant. Craig, what's your thoughts, predictions? What's healthcare going to look like, and how's DrugBank going to fit into that?
Yeah, I think that's the thing about the healthcare space. There's a lot of this awesome focus on personalized medicine and new innovation, but there's also tons of just sort of boring old problems that cover the whole space that are not being solved, and they haven't been solved in even though we've had all this data and access to all this data and technology, they still are just sitting there and honestly having very negative impacts on people's lives. So I think if you look at it as that system, you can start to break out these segments where DrugBank, we can go in and say, okay, we're gonna address the problem, the fact that this particular drug is being prescribed and it actually turns out it doesn't work. There is an example of a drug like that. There's many other examples, and if we can come in and say, okay, here is the sort of early warning system that this drug is no longer the right choice anymore. Doctors trust that, pick it up, they make the better decision. So there's these optimizations that can occur, and overall will just lift the whole system up and reduce costs and ultimately save more lives. While also this sort of overall arc of innovation is still growing. So it's sort of the bottom-up approach for me.
I absolutely love it. And, I really appreciate some of the pioneering work that you're doing in this space. Somebody may think of, well, database has been around forever, but this is a smart database. And this database gets smarter with time, and it's consistently refreshed, and people are always getting the most current information, and just really the way you're building the query system so that people can actually learn and ask smarter questions over time. So this is fantastic. For those people who are listening to the show today and you want to connect with Michael and Craig to learn more about what DrugBank is doing, learning about their API, if you're either building a blockchain or you're just looking for new drugs, or you want to build this into your EMR system and want to enable physicians to make smarter clinical decisions, we will leave their contact details in the show notes below. So please look for that. If you did enjoy this discussion, we also encourage you to check out impetusdigital.com. We have conversations with people like you, your stakeholders, physicians, allied healthcare providers, payers, patients. We bring them in the Impetus Insight platform through a series of touch points, either asynchronous or synchronous, so that we can do work using our asynchronous tools, getting people to think about projects, ideas, agenda items, working on databases. How are you going to leverage systems like this? And then you can actually create new protocols and ideas in your own system. So this is actually what Impetus does. And we bundle that with our white glove service so that we can actually help you with your advisory discussions. So please like and subscribe to our channel. And we'd really appreciate if you can leave us a review on iTunes as well. Thank you to all of you for your time today. And also thank you so much, Michael and Craig, for a brilliant discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That was great.
Thank you.
Have a great day, everybody.